In this video, we discuss why connection is tricky for different dances, including West Coast Swing. What's up, gang? Brian B.
And Miss Megan.
From West Coast Swing Online here on our Frustration Fridays, where we cover a difficult, tricky topic of West Coast Swing and other dances. And this one came in via what, email?
Yes.
Email. So it was actually specifically about waltz and how is the away connection. The person who wrote in was having a trouble staying in this away connection in waltz. But first, let's cover an overview of connection. And if you're a West Coast Swing fan, which I'm sure you are because you're on West Coast Swing Online, there is a great video I'm going to link up that we did, actually a blog post that has 3 great tips for connection of West Coast Swing and a link to a video that will cover all things connection West Coast Swing. So if you want to dig into that topic, Megan will link this up in the top right. You can head on over there. But let's discuss 3 different types of connection and then how they're going to apply to West Coast Swing, and then we'll specifically answer this struggle in waltz. So there are 3 different kinds of connection. There's different words for these. We'll use the most easy to understand ones. We have some sort of an away connection. We have some sort of a towards connection, and then we have some sort of a rotational connection. And in West Coast Swing, we know that in a sugar push or a push break, we use an away to a towards to away. There are some rotational connections that work in at maybe like a higher level, but I feel like for most of us, if we master the away and towards connections, that will get us most of the way there. And then I think as a competitor and an advanced dancer, we use rotational connections. Any thoughts
Quite a bit.
on overall connection tips?
No, the away connection is very important in all dances, whether it's in a closed position here, or if it's in 2 hands, depending on what dance. Away could also maybe mean out a little bit in our flared position that we talk about.
Yeah, so let's kind of cover this from a basic West Coast Swing position. Again, if you want the full video, the link in the description, we cover this. But we need to create some sort of an away connection. Now, if I'm using my hands, I have to use my fingers first and foremost, right? That's the first thing that has to be connected is I'm using my fingers. Regardless of your grip or the style of dance you're doing, my fingers have to be engaged. Then, of course, the muscles of my arm have to be engaged. Good rule for West Coast Swing is that I don't want the dreaded W. You'll see that in the video that we link up in the corner. We have actually a picture of yes and, or no and yes. So I need that. Number 2, both hands, right? My center has to be then moved away. Now you can think about this. This gets a little high level, but as the weight progressing through my feet, so you can see Megan and I being towards and then away. So the weight through my foot this is what sometimes we call our center moving away, right? But that's my center tracking over my foot. So if it's on the front side of my foot and now the back side of my foot. So that's a good way that we can use 2 hands to create an away connection. It's the same thing. I'm going to spin Miss Megan around this side. It's the same thing if we're in closed position, right? We are tracking our centers through our feet away to create an away connection, right? So that's using a closed position. And we're going to spin back around and answer this in waltz because we're going to spin in a little get that spin in a little rotational connection. So that is the away connection that we need to work on. The second one is of towards connection. So now we have to be connected towards, which is our center connecting through our feet from the back side of our foot into the front side of our foot with tone in the arms. Now for this specifically, if we're talking like West Coast Swing, I want to leave these bones lined up, and this will actually be the same for cha-cha as well, where these bones are lined up. We don't want these kinks, and sometimes in West Coast Swing we get these kinks. It's not the most efficient. It'll work for sure, but if we're talking about the most efficient, those bones are lined up, these bones of my arm are lined up, and so now we're just dealing with the major joints, not all of these little joints of our fingers that can create fits, right? So good practice is to track our centers away, track our centers forward. And this is a good drill to be able to catch yourself on both sides. The good rule also is when you get to the away side, you should not fall over, but you're at the edge, right? You don't want to get to the point where you're so relying upon your partner that you're going to fall over. So those are the 2 basic connections, right? The third one is a rotational connection, which we tend to use. What would you say we use this most in?
Two-step.
Two-step. Why? Because there's tons of rotation for the followers, so we're going to use that rotation. Again, if you want more stuff on two-step connections, our site has a great hour-long video that we did on specifically how we use rotational connections in two-step. So if you're kind of advancing your game in that, it's on the video section of our website. I'll also link up a cool resource for two-step in general, some basic technique stuff. There's a page on our site on Country Dance Online. Megan will link that up right there. But the rotational connection will work in dances also like cha-cha, where we're rotating into these types of connections, right? So we might have an away connection here, but this turns into a rotational connection. Now, let's spin back around and answer this specific question in waltz, because if we're thinking about this away connection in West Coast swing, right, there's kind of a heaviness to it, right? A comfortable heaviness that we work off of in West Coast swing. It can be light or heavy, but we're comfortable having a solid connection. And in waltz, that type of heavy connection is probably not a great idea from a social dance perspective. For sure, as a competitor, we use a lot of low body weight and we use a strong connection through different through different pieces. But from a social dance perspective, we don't want that much heaviness. We want a more responsiveness. So this was the specific struggle on our Frustration Fridays, was the connection into this hand. And if you're searching for it like West Coast swing, you're gonna have a difficult time finding it. So it is an away connection. One of the things we're gonna use is a little rotation, and we're gonna pop away from each other. You can stay in your position. I'm gonna use a little rotation, and if you notice, what's happening is I use that slight rotation, squaring my upper body off to my feet, is I'm tightening in the connection on my right hand without pulling, right? So we're not pulling. We're West Coast swing. We can manage it through our arm a little bit. Here we're using some rotation to click ourselves into that position. If you're a West Coast swing dancer, you can actually use this a little bit. If we're in a closed position in West Coast swing, right? If Megan rotates this side back, watch what happens to the connection. She slides off of it, right? If she rotates that left side back and hooks herself in, and as the leader, I do the same. I rotate kind of internal. I create a good, solid, squared up connection with our centers towards each other and a good, solid connection, even if we step on each other's feet. So in waltz, you're gonna take that position. There is a connection to that hand, but we're gonna rotate into it. We're gonna create a slight bit of an away connection, just enough, and this is a good way to manage it. If I walked, could Megan monitor that connection without coming out of it? So there is your way to use an away connection in waltz specifically, because that was the question via email. I don't remember who came in from.
I don't either.
It's been a bit. It's been a bit with all this lockdown to coronavirus. If we spin through these connections in other dances, East Coast, here's a rule. Every time you take the hand of your partner, you're gonna search for one of those connections. Preferably in swing dancing away. Click, we're looking for that connection, right? We will find towards connections in different dances, but if I'm dancing East Coast swing, click, we have an away connection, off we go, right? East Coast swing, we tend, because of the rock step, to use what? Can you see it? A rotational connection is another one we use from a high level. If you look at there it is, there's a rotational connection that we use quite a bit for East Coast swing. Cha-cha, pretty standard towards and away. So even if I'm doing a back break for my follower, I'm in a forward connection to send my follower away. And there's lots of different choices, but even in these forward and back basics, we're either gonna work off of a forward connection to an away connection, back to a forward connection, or sometimes we could use just an away connection the whole time, right? And then we turn into what? A rotational connection as we're rotating our body. So cha-cha will also use quite a bit of a rotational connection on the crossover breaks. Any thoughts around either East Coast or cha-cha?
Yeah, so when you're in a closed position, West Coast is very, very connected back. East Coast is gonna be pretty similar, but if you're just thinking about this hand on your back in cha-cha and any like rumba or stuff like that, it's not going to be as connected away.
Not super heavy. A little bit more responsive, because West Coast swing, we're in that away connection and we have the walk to manage before we have to lead, where I think the other dances need to be a little bit more responsive.
Ready to go.
Yeah, and a little less lazy. You can afford to be a little lazy, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but in a hanging back, and it's actually preferential in West Coast swing because you need to hang back as the follower to find out on the 1-2 where the pattern is going to develop. So that being a little heavier back is probably actually preferable. I could call it lazy, but it's actually probably a good idea. So we've covered cha-cha, East Coast, nightclub. Nightclub, what do you think about nightclub?
I actually think away in a different away, if that makes sense. I think out.
Yeah. Here's another good tip for your away connections in general. And we tend to use this in our dancing. We really leveled this up when we were competing the last run before we retired. But a little bit of a flare to that elbow, and this comes from some top country and swing pros as well. A little flare to that elbow. So you on the camera don't see much, right? But Megan and I feel quite a bit more through a flared connection our elbows. And we use this quite a bit both in our basic West Coast swing grip. We also use it on some two-step patterns where we finish and we create a little flare in that elbow. Watch this, right? We talked about an away connection. We talked about it through this elbow, flat through there, through that elbow. So if this was West Coast swing and this was down here, right? A little bit of a flare in that elbow. You've got that. Let's spin around so everyone can see. You've got that connection through there. We use the same thing in two-step, right? Whereas we did that pattern, if we did that pattern without, and we kept straight, we can connect. This is not wrong, but you want to level up your game. A little flare to the elbow to increase your away connection. But spinning back to nightclub, again, most of the time we are in an away connection, right? We're in this away connection. I'm using this away connection almost the entire time. There are definitely some moments competitively where you'd use a forward connection, you know, like a forward connection to create certain things. That was a little waltz-ish. And a heavier connection. Yeah, so there you go. Your basic connections towards, away, and to a smaller degree, a rotational. In closed position, you are going to use that away connection with a slight bit of rotation so that you don't slide off your partner. And in waltz specifically, away connection, that slight bit of rotation, and keep it a little bit lighter and more responsive. Cool. If you want to dig in to the video we did for West Coast Swing, there's a cool blog post in the corner that Megan will relink up. It has 3 awesome tips for connection, including a full video we did just on West Coast Swing connection where we went in detail on all of those things and some things you could talk about your feet and such. So thanks for hanging out with us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Go grab those resources. Always check the descriptions below because we link up really cool things. We have an ebook. We have a free membership to our site. Lots of cool stuff. And depending upon when this video comes out, we are going to try to circle back to a few more live videos since we're still on a little bit of a lockdown, right? We're back here in Louisville. We're doing private lessons. Small group classes are starting. But we're aware that a lot of you guys still don't have all of the full resources of your dance community. So we're going to try to add back in some live video actions, even if it's in a Q&A format. So if you have any questions, suggestions, leave a comment below. Anything to say in closing, Miss Megan?
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys. We'll see you guys soon.